I mean, I think that's fair to say. So are you ruling out any change?
You can see all of the Pentagon briefing at cspan.org, and after the House is out tonight, it's here on C-SPAN. The House is coming in now to vote on a measure debated earlier today.
Resolution 563, resolution providing for consideration of the bill H.R. 2117 to prohibit the Department of Education from overreaching into academic affairs and program eligibility under Title IV of the Higher Education Act of 1965.
Referred to the House calendar and order printed. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the unfinished business is the vote on the motion of gentleman from Texas, Mr. Smith, to suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment to H.R. 347, on which the yeas and nays were ordered. The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 347, an act to correct and simplify the drafting of Section 1752 relating to restricted buildings or grounds of Title 18 United States Code.
The question is, will the House suspend the rules and concur in the Senate amendment? Members will record their votes by electronic device. This is a 15-minute vote.
The bill the House is voting on clarifies current law that prohibits those without authority to be on restricted or cordoned off federal property, meaning that those with authority to be on federal property can be there. Another bill the House will debate later in the week deals with California water rights. We spoke with a reporter to get more information about the House agenda. Members of the House and Senate returned today after a week-long break for President's Day. Jason Dick, House Senator at Roll Call, what's on their legislative agendas during this next stretch of work?
Not a whole lot, especially for this coming week. The original plan was that the House would be considering a transportation funding bill that the Speaker, John Boehner, was supportive of and had sort of tacked his imprimatur on. And as he introduced this legislation earlier this year to great fanfare, saying that he wanted to sort of rethink the way highway transportation funding was debated and linked and so forth, and the opposition just continued to mount over the course of the last couple of weeks. At first they wanted to just delay the vote, and then they sort of broke it up into a few different pieces, and then we got the word last week, late in the week, that they wouldn't be considering it at all this week, and that they were actually going to, just scrap it all together and start looking to take up a version that would be more similar to the Senate's version. So it set off this scramble to figure out what they could vote on, and so that's why we have a Private Property Rights Protection Act of 2012 today. Later on in the week, we'll see them vote on measures that would make it easier to sell off federal property and some other things like that.
Well, what about that Senate transportation bill? What will that look like here in the House?
We don't really have as many details, partly because this is a very sudden thing that happened. We were still under the impression that they were going to vote on at least one component of this transportation bill that the Speaker had gotten behind. Right now, the original intent in the House was that a traditional 5-year transportation bill would come, and it would be worth about $260 billion. The Senate is considering on the floor this week a bill that was reported out of their own Environment and Public Works Committee that has the support both of the Democratic Chairwoman Barbara Boxer as well as the Republican Ranking Member James Inhofe. And that's a smaller bill. It's a 2-year, $109 billion bill, and it looks, what we're hearing, at least at roll call, is that the House bill will more closely resemble that. Now, the Senate bill is not a for sure thing either. They're dealing with a lot of different issues, but it looks like it has a better chance at this point than the House's original bill did.
You mentioned that lawmakers are not working on much this week. There have been a lot of news stories written that since Congress is effectively done with any serious legislating until after the general election. What do you make of that?
There is some truth to it, actually. For years, if you're in Washington long enough, or in the political arena, you hear that, well, we have to get everything done in the odd-numbered years, the 2007, 2009, 2011, and so forth, because the next year, the election year cycle kind of takes over, and that seems to have kind of gone into overdrive this year. There are a couple of reasons for that. One is that the debt ceiling deal that Congress cleared and the President signed last summer actually set some of the spending levels that Congress needs in order to do spending, discretionary spending accounts and appropriations. They set those levels last summer, so there isn't as much of a push to do, say, a budget resolution this year because the funding levels are already set. So that took off a lot of sort of the steam, because a lot of the beginning of each legislative year, whether it's an election year or a legislative year, is taken up by doing the budget. So there is not as much. I mean, several committees are still having hearings about what their budget should look like and what they need and what they don't need and so forth. But it doesn't have as much of the sort of the clamor as it does in previous years. Also, because the payroll tax cut conference was resolved right before Congress went on its break, that also is something that had consumed a lot of energy at the beginning of this year and at the end of last year before we got a 2-month extension. And without that, without the kind of this vociferous kind of competition that comes out about taxes and spending and entitlements and so forth, there isn't as much that they can kind of sink their teeth into. And really, I mean, the presidential race has really, particularly on the Republican side, has taken a lot of sort of the wind out of the sails of Congress. I think a lot of people are waiting to see what happens tomorrow in Arizona and Michigan, and then next week we have Super Tuesday. And for Republicans, particularly, without a standard bearer on the presidential side, they would prefer that person, that standard bearer, kind of take the lead on a lot of policy issues. So without a standard bearer, they are left to do some of the more kind of pedestrian things that Congress does.
Jason Dick is House Editor at Roll Call. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
You heard in the interview about how the presidential primaries are affecting what's happening on Capitol Hill. Michigan and Arizona's primaries are tomorrow night, and later on this evening we'll have Rick Santorum live from Kalamazoo, Michigan. He'll be speaking at Heritage Christian Academy at 7:30 Eastern over on C-SPAN 3. Polls show a toss-up between Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum. The Hill writes that Romney, whose father is a former Michigan governor, was once presumed to have a significant home state advantage, but a slew of polling data released today shows that the contest will be decided by the thinnest of margins. Tomorrow night, C-SPAN's coverage of primary results in Arizona and Michigan starts live at 9 p.m. Eastern with candidate speeches and your phone calls.
The yeas are 387, the nays are 3. Two-thirds being in the affirmative.
Mrs. Nome. Mrs. Nome votes aye.
Have all members voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? On this vote, the yeas are 388, the nays are 3, two-thirds being in the affirmative. The rules are suspended. The Senate amendment is agreed to. And without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid on the table. The House will be in order. Please take your conversations off the floor. Order. Who's going? For what purpose does the gentleman from Indiana seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, the House is not in order.
The House will be in order. The
Mr.
gentleman
Speaker,
from Indiana is recognized.
thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to, if I could get everybody's attention, ask for a moment of silence. We just lost a former member of Congress, Katie Hall, from Gary, Indiana. And after that, Mr. Speaker, if you would be so kind, we'd like to have a moment or two to make some comments about Ms. Hall. So I request that the House have a moment of silence in remembrance of Katie Hall.
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. The gentleman from Indiana is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me just start off real quickly before I yield to my colleague from Gary, Indiana, and say that Katie Hall, who was a member of this body, died just this last few days from an unknown illness. She was 73 years old. She came from very humble beginnings in Mound Bayo, Mississippi. She grew up on her grandfather's cotton farm, and she was a teacher for more than 30 years.
The House will be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. The gentleman may proceed.
Thank you very much. She was a very fine teacher, and she moved in 1962 to Gary, Indiana, where she became a very good friend of Richard Hatcher, the mayor. And when a good friend of mine, Adam Benjamin, who was once a member of this body, died, Mr. Hatcher, Mayor Hatcher, appointed her as the nominee on the Democrat Party, for the Democrat Party to succeed him. She also served in the Indiana Senate. I served with her there. She was a very fine person.
The gentleman is correct. The House will be in order. Take your conversations off the floor. The gentleman from Indiana may proceed.
And during her time in the Congress, she sponsored, along with others, but she was one of the key sponsors in 1983 of a national holiday in remembrance of Dr. Martin Luther King. And she was credited with a for playing a very key role in getting that bill passed after it had stalled in the House for over 14 years. Let me just say that she was a great lady, a great congresswoman, and she'll be missed, and we want to send our deepest sympathy to her family and her friends. And with that, I'll be happy to yield to my colleague, the senior member. Let me start with the senior member from Gary, Indiana.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate the indulgence of the chair. I appreciate the gentleman yielding and asking for the moment of silence.
Mr. Speaker, could we ask the folks over there to be silent for just a few minutes?
The House will be in order. The House will be in order. Members, please take your conversations off the floor. The gentleman from Indiana may proceed.
I appreciate it. Again, I would express my appreciation for the Dean of our delegation, Mr. Burton, for asking for the moment of silence and the Speaker's indulgence. Ms. Burton rightfully pointed out Mrs. Hall's ascendancy into the Congress and her sponsorship of the legislation that led to Dr. King's birthday being declared a national holiday. Would also point out to my colleagues that Mrs. Hall also served in the Indiana House as well as the Indiana Senate, and following her service in the United States Congress also served as clerk for the city of Gary for 5 years from 1988 to 2003. She does leave a granddaughter, 2 daughters, and a husband. My sympathies and all of ours go out to the family as well. I also think that Mrs. Hall probably would want to be most remembered for her role as an educator and those who taught young people in the Gary school system. She certainly always served her family. She always served those she taught and represented, and she certainly served her country. And again, our sympathies go to the family, and I deeply appreciate the respect shown by the gentleman from Indiana.
I thank the gentleman for his remarks, and I'd be very happy to yield to my colleague from Indianapolis.
Thank you, colleague. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment and join my colleagues to honor the life of former Congresswoman Katie Hall, who passed last week at the age of 73. I met her as a young man. In fact, I had the chance to spend some time with her in the early 80s in San Francisco during the Democratic National Convention. But she quickly made a name for herself, to my colleague's point, not only as a strong advocate and leader in the state of Indiana, but as an educator. She knew that America's children were suffering, and she supported alternative education, Mr. Speaker. She understood that children had different needs, and she made sure that she was an advocate of different educational models to meet those needs. So, with my deepest sympathies go out to her family and friends who are mourning her passing, and we know that Indiana politics will not be the same. I yield back. Thank you, colleague, for acknowledging.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and she will be missed. And once again, our sympathy goes out to her and to her family and all of her loved ones. And with that, we yield back the balance of our time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair is prepared to entertain 1-minute requests. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, February 23rd, Virginia and our nation lost a true hero. Sergeant T.J. Conrad was killed in action in the Nangarhar province in Afghanistan in the rioting there. Sergeant Conrad was just 22 years old, a husband, a father, a son, and a brother, outgoing, determined, and a man of true grit. Sergeant Conrad truly personified the Army's old slogan, "Be all you can be." Born in Newport News and raised in Roanoke County, Sergeant Conrad grew up attending Masons Cove Elementary School, Northside Middle School, and Northside High School. In high school, he was an outstanding wrestler. In his senior year, he helped lead his team to the Blue Ridge District title in the regular season and the tournament. Today, I wish to extend my prayers and our prayers and condolences to Sergeant Conrad's wife, Holly, his infant son, Bentley, his parents, his relatives, and his friends. His father has stated that he will always be remembered for his great sense of humor, his infectious smile, his kind heart, his desire to brighten anyone's day. On behalf of a grateful nation, we grieve the loss of our warrior brother, but we honor Sergeant Conrad for his courage, his sacrifice, and his selfless commitment to duty, honor, and country. He gave his all in service for the sake of our safety, our freedom, and our liberty. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
To address the House for 1 minute, revising extent.
Without objection.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Minnetonka girls high school hockey team on winning their second consecutive Minnesota 2A state title this weekend at the Xcel Energy in St. Paul. Mr. Speaker, after winning last year's championship in a nail-biting game, the Minnetonka Skippers this year defeated the Roseville Raiders 3-0. The first goal came early in the first period by defender Holly Korn, who scored on a power play, and after that, forward Diana Dreyer followed up with the second goal late in the third period. And then finally, there was a third goal by Junia Laura Borman, who scored the final goal. Of course, this victory could not have happened were it not for the outstanding goaltending of goalie Sydney Rossman, who blocked 23 shots in the shutout. Mr. Speaker, I just want to congratulate all the girls on the Minnetonka Skippers hockey team, as well as their coaches. I also want to thank and recognize their hard work, their training, their perseverance, and their commitment, because it really paid off. We're proud of these student athletes, and so is our entire community. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Texas rise? Without objection.
Speaker, I serve on the Homeland Security Committee and have the privilege of serving on the committee dealing with foreign affairs here in the House. I rise today to, as usual, offer our deepest sympathy for all of our soldiers that have fallen in battle. But I'm particularly outraged at the incidents that are occurring around the unfortunate burning of the Koran, of which our President appropriately extended his apology, as we would if someone if someone had burned Bibles. But it is outrageous for our soldiers to be in harm's way, for them to lose their life. It is time now for the Afghan National Security Forces to stand up and be security forces. It's time for President Karzai to indicate that he will not be driven out by the Taliban, and it's time for us not to allow the Taliban again to take grips or hold of the Afghan people. This is a tragic and horrible situation. None of us would have wanted to occur, but we cannot stand for our soldiers to be in the eye of the storm and being shot for something that they did not do intentionally or individually. And so I would ask that our soldiers be taken out of harm's way around any Afghan National Security Forces that we cannot vet and ensure that they are intending to do the right thing. We need to hear from President Karzai in a way that denounces this horrible action, and we must stand up to the Taliban and have a transition out of Afghanistan where the Afghan National Security Forces are protecting their people, and they are allowed, in essence, to have a nation that protects women and children and families and has the adherence to the law that requires human decency. With that, I yield back.
Are there further one-minute requests? If not, the chair lays before the House the following personal requests.
Leave of absence requested for Mr. Bilbray of California for today, Mr. Culberson of Texas for today, and Mr. Jesse Jackson of Illinois for today.
Without objection, the requests are granted. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5, 2011, the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Griffin, is recognized for 60 minutes as the designee of the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I came here to the floor tonight to talk with some of my colleagues and the American people about what I believe is the most pressing issue facing our country. A lot of us have been home working in our districts over the last week, seeing our constituents, speaking at local Rotary clubs, visiting with constituents in the office and around the district. And it is clear to me that the top priority for the American people over the last year remains the same, and that is jobs. People back home are encouraged and are optimistic about the future, but they need some signs that jobs are increasing here in the United States. Jobs remain the #1 issue. Since I got here a little over a year ago with some of my freshman colleagues, a lot of us have made jobs our sole focus. And there are a lot of different things that we can do to encourage job creation. My focus has been on the private sector. Private sector job creation, in my view, is the way that we get our economy going again, not through government stimulus. We've tried that to the tune of about $1 trillion, almost $1 trillion, and it has not done what the President promised. It seems to me the best approach is to create an environment here in this country where the private sector can flourish, where people want to take risk, where they want to invest and compete with other countries. So how do we do that? Well, there are a variety of ways, and that's why we're here tonight, to talk about some of these. I'm joined by some of my colleagues, and I think that they would agree that one of the ways that we can encourage the private sector to grow and create jobs is through tax reform, fundamental tax reform. Another way is regulatory reform. Job creators around my district tell me what a lot of us know, and that is that not regulation, but over-regulation. Not regulation, but excessive regulation is a tax on businesses. And it's a tax on job creators. So we need tax reform. We need regulatory reform. Thirdly, we need to further pursue our energy resources here in the United States. We need to construct, for example, the Keystone XL pipeline that the President first delayed and then denied. So thirdly, we need to further explore our energy resources. And fourthly, we need to live within our means as a government. That means dealing with our spending problem, our spending addiction, our debt, our trillion-plus dollar deficits. So if you were to ask me, what's your plan? What would you do? What are you trying to do? What have you been fighting for a year, over a year, to try to encourage the private sector to grow jobs in this country? I would say tax reform, regulatory reform, increased energy exploration and development here in the United States, and making the federal government live within our means. Those four things, if we can address them in bold ways, we can change the course of this country's fiscal situation and the economy, and ultimately grow this economy and create jobs. I'm going to turn now and yield to the gentleman from Virginia if he'd like to comment on some of this.
Thank you, Congressman Griffin. I do, and I agree with what you had to say and wholeheartedly support your concepts and where we need to be moving this country. And let me say to each and every one of you that the American worker is second to none in this world, second to none. When you look at our workers, they are the most innovative workers in the world, and they are the hardest workers in the world. Statistics, different reports continue to show us this point. We will never compete with the Chinese and other countries on wages, nor do we want to. But our advantage, Congressman Griffin, is that we have the ability to use our energy resources in a way that we can create jobs, and we can fight for American jobs by having affordable energy. That's our trump card. And for some reason, those in the administration want to tie our hands behind our backs and not allow our businesses to use our trump card to keep jobs in the United States and bring jobs back. And that is that we have great energy resources in this country. You know, the President was recently in Florida, and he mockingly described Republican plans on energy and getting gas prices down. He said, step one is drill, step two is drill, step three is drill. Well, you know, the President's just wrong. We have a true all-of-the-above policy, and I like to describe it this way. It is drill. That's step one. Step two, dig. Step three, discover. Step four, deregulate. And let me explain a little bit. Drill's easy. We have vast untapped resources in oil, and we have huge resources in natural gas. If we're allowed to drill for natural gas and for oil, we can turn around a lot of the things that are happening in this country. And let's talk about gas prices, because that affects jobs. Listen, some of this has to do with looking at the world market. And if we signaled immediately that we were ready to start using our resources, the prices would come down, because those people who are speculating that oil is not going to be available in the future, and not the so distant future, but also even 2 or 3 years from now, would realize that the giant in the world of energy was finally awakened from its slumber and ready to go on the march for jobs. And so I think it's important that we look at drilling. I don't think we should be mocking it. Now, dig. Obviously, we have a lot of coal resources in this country. My district has a lot of coal. It also has natural gas. We are #1 in the world in coal resources. Everybody else in the world is using the coal. We are the ones who refuse to use it. As I said before, we have our hands tied behind our backs. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I've got to tell you something. We need to have reasonable regulations, but we've got to untie our hands and be ready to use our coal. The Chinese are now buying our coal to use our coal to make the products, the goods that we used to make in this country. And guess what? A lot of times folks say, we don't want to use coal because it has pollution and it creates problems. But a NASA study has shown us that if we have the Chinese using our coal to make the products we used to make, they get the money for those products, their people have the jobs, and guess what happens to the pollutants in the air? It takes roughly 10 days to get from the middle of the Gobi Desert to the eastern shore of my beloved Virginia. Just 10 days. We know that a significant portion of the mercury in our air is coming from foreign sources, not our plants, but foreign sources.
Can I inject something there?
I yield back.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on something the gentleman just said. I think it's a great point. And a lot of times, some of us think about this country and pollution here. But I think that what I hear you saying, it's a very, very good point, is that this is one world, and we in this country, through the processes and the regulatory structure that we have, we burn coal cleaner. We are a better steward of the earth when it comes to using some of these traditional energy sources. So what I hear you saying is, and I think it makes a lot of sense, if you believe that coal will not be used if we do not use it here, then that's not exactly accurate. Somebody's going to burn it. The question is, do we do a better job with some of these traditional energy sources? Do we do a better job than other countries that will burn it if we don't? The Chinese can burn the same coal, yet regulate it in a way where they do a lot more damage to the environment. And that brings me actually to the Keystone Pipeline. The President first delayed it, then he denied it, so that the extreme environmentalists would be happy with him. But if you apply what you're talking about, it seems to me we would rather be refining the oil sands from Canada in this country instead of the alternative that Canada has talked about, which is shipping it to China for refining. Why? Because we refine cleaner, we refine safer, we do a better job. Those oil sands are going to be refined. The issue is not if we don't refine them, no one will. The fact is they will be refined. The issue is, do we refine them or do the Chinese refine them? And I think what you're saying, and I wholeheartedly agree, we do a better job here.
Absolutely.
And I yield back.
And I would have to say we do a much better job here. And, you know, it's almost like I can remember when I was much younger, liberals always said to conservatives, well, you all act like the United States is the only country in the world and we have to look at the whole world. Now the liberals are looking at it and saying, well, the United States is the only country in the world, we have to only look at the United States and we don't look at the big picture. And I think inadvertently, even with good intentions, there are in fact greater pollution risks by us not using our energy than there are with us using our energy with the reasonable regulations that have been in place for some time. That being said, let's take a look how that impacts on jobs. Not only do we get the pollution, but we don't get the jobs. We don't get the money. And you talked about, you know, living within our means and so forth. I mean, let's just take a look at my district. AEP, American Electric Power, is the biggest power provider in my district. There are others. They have estimated with new regulations, energy costs are going to go up 10 to 15% as they spend an additional $6 to $8 billion. 10 to 15% on hardworking American families is tough. But when you look at the job component, that means it's going to cost more in my district to make potato chips. It's going to cost more in my district to work the family farm. It's going to cost more in my district to make furniture. It's going to cost more in my district to make paper products, whiteboard. And that's just, I just touched on the surface.
Sure.
Every single retail establishment, every single business has to use electricity. But when you raise the cost of manufacturing goods or using electricity to manufacture goods by 10 to 15% over the course of the next few years, you're making us less competitive in the world. And we lose more jobs. And we have more people who are unemployed and more people who aren't able to go out and buy products, which then means more people lose their jobs because they're not selling those Fords down at the Ford place. They're not selling washing machines and TVs and all the products that are out there. And we lose even more jobs because of the failure to recognize that the regulations are killing our jobs and our jobs are going elsewhere. And I have to say, getting back to what I call the 4 Ds, drill, dig, discover, and deregulate, I'm not saying we don't look at all of the above. The President was in Florida. He said we only wanted to drill, 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 and he was talking about algae. Well, I'm not one of those people who's going to criticize the President for looking at algae. I think algae actually has a positive future. But it's a positive future that is probably 15 to 50 years away. 15 to 50 years. We need energy now. We need affordable energy now. We need jobs now. And to be looking at something, I think it's absolutely right. That's the discover part of those 4 Ds. We need to encourage discovery. But one of the ways to encourage discovery is to deregulate and let people make a product without having all kinds of regulations put on top of them. It's interesting how folks want to do all these things, and then they come up with regulations, and they find out that the new startup companies oftentimes have difficulty creating the new alternative energies because they run into other regulations that prohibit them from going forward. So I think we need to make sure we look at drill, dig, discovery, looking at those alternatives, finding more ways that we can be efficient, and finding new alternative energies, and then let's not regulate our industries out of existence, which is where we're headed at this point. And when you do that, we continue to lose jobs. We continue to have a flat economy. Look, I don't think saying that you know, we're down on the unemployment situation has gotten better, but we're still in the neighborhood of 8%. I don't think that's anything to celebrate. I'm glad it's better, but I don't think it's something that you go out and go, woo, we've solved our problems. And I believe that we have not solved our problems at this point. We're working on it, and that's good. And the economy in this country, because of our hard-working Americans, because they're innovative, and because they work harder than anybody else, is not going to just roll over and die. But at the same time, it could be doing so much better, and we need to maintain that we are the #1 economic power in the world. And the way to do that is to keep our jobs by keeping our energy and our energy sources and our energy costs at a reasonable level so that we can, in fact, compete with the low-wage countries of the world. We don't want the low wages, but to do so, to make sure that we can still compete, we have to keep our energy affordable.
With the gentleman yield, I want to comment a little bit on the all-the-above strategy that you're talking about. I am an advocate for an all-the-above energy strategy. We've heard the President mention that. But we here in the House have been advocating for that. I have since I got here. That includes alternate energy sources, renewable energy sources, biodiesel, wind, solar. I'm for those things. But I'm also for the traditional energy sources. And in addition, nuclear. We have a clean, safe, nuclear energy plant, power plant in Arkansas that we count on to provide safe, affordable energy. We also have coal plants, other sorts of energy sources. We make, in my district, we make the windmill blades that go on these massive windmills. We also have well-spun tubular in my district, in the 2nd Congressional District of Arkansas, and they've recently been in the news because there's been a lot of uncertainty about their future as a result of the President killing the Keystone Pipeline or denying the permit. The happy news that I have to report is that Wellspun is doing some diversifying. They did have to lay some people off after the Keystone Pipeline was delayed, but they're doing some diversifying so they can make some other sorts of pipe, and they're actually going to expand. I'm hoping that once we get, and I believe we will ultimately win the battle on the Keystone Pipeline, once we get the Keystone Pipeline in full swing, the construction in full swing, then that will further help Wellspun. So I'm for all of the above. But I know that in my lifetime, we are still going to be using a lot of these traditional energy sources. It's not an either-or. We can continue to pursue wind and continue to pursue solar and continue to pursue biodiesel and alternate energies, renewable energy sources. But at the same time, pursue the traditional sources, particularly natural gas. Natural gas is abundant. And best of all, it's American. And in my case, it's Arkansan. We've got a lot of natural gas in my district and other districts in Arkansas. It is abundant and it is cheap. And where ethanol can increase the wear on a traditional engine, car engine. Natural gas can extend the life of that engine. So I want to turn the conversation over to my friend from the 3rd District of Arkansas, Congressman Steve Womack. He's got a lot of natural gas in his district as well. Before I do, I just want to recap. We have jobs as our main goal, and there are pillars under that goal of jobs. And those pillars are tax reform, regulatory reform, further energy exploration, and getting our spending under control so that we deal with our debt and we live within our means. Those are 4 pillars. They're not separate from job creation. They are critical. They are a critical part of encouraging private sector job creation and giving certainty to job creators. Now I'd like to yield to my friend from Arkansas, Steve Womack.
I thank the gentleman, and I do appreciate his leadership in this discussion about job creation in America. I've said many, many times that if there is an elixir out there to fix the problems, the challenges facing our country today, it's job creation. And what the gentleman from Arkansas has been articulating in the last several minutes has been a very good discussion about the 4 things, and I couldn't agree more, the 4 things that are part and parcel to our country creating jobs and putting itself on a different fiscal path. And he's talked about overregulation. I'll come back to that in a moment. He's talked about the threat of higher taxes and the need for comprehensive tax reform in our nation. He's talked about the need for a solid energy policy that allows our country to access its own resources, American energy resources, to solve America's energy challenges. And, of course, he's talked about the deficits and the debt. Now, if you kind of look at the plight that we're in today insofar as job creation, greater than 8% unemployment, sustained unemployment over 8%, and when you look at the fact that people are out here scrambling to find work, meaningful jobs, they want to be productive, they want to contribute to American exceptionalism, and the way you do that is not by taking a welfare check, it's by having a paycheck. That if you're looking at this plight today like you would a pending storm, it's a dark, dark cloud of uncertainty that hangs over the job creators. And I submit to you that the reason so many people who are sitting on trillions of dollars of cash that would like to get into the game and create jobs, expand the American economy, that the reason they're not doing it is because they have a difficult time computing their input costs. They don't know how energy is going to affect their ability to create jobs. They don't know how the next regulation, the next rule that's going to come down from Washington is going to impact their ability to earn a profit. They're not confident, as evidenced by the downgrade that we had last year by the S&P. They're not confident that this Congress, these people that gather in this chamber every day, are capable of making the decisions, having the courage to make the decisions to put America on a different fiscal path. And it's a dark, dark cloud of uncertainty. I don't blame them for sitting on the sideline right now, but there's a lot of cash ready to get in the game if we'll just do some of the right things. And you know, the gentlemen that have spoken tonight talked about regulation. That's not why I came to the floor tonight. That's not why what I wanted to talk about primarily, but I came from a meeting right before votes today that talked about an issue totally unrelated to my district and unrelated to most of America. But it's out in California. And later this week, we're going to vote on H.R. 1837, the Sacramento-San Joaquin Valley Water Reliability Act. And when I heard my colleague from California talking passionately about this issue, as he's done a number of times from the well of his house, back in 2009, federal regulations to protect a 3-inch fish, the Delta smelt, led to the deliberate diversion of over 300 billion gallons of water away from the San Joaquin Valley and their farmers.
cost thousands of farm workers their jobs, inflicted up to 40% unemployment in certain communities, and fallowed hundreds of thousands of acres of fertile farmland. Those are real people. Those were real jobs. And because of federal regulations and this desire on the part of this Congress, this federal government, I should say, to protect a 3-inch fish, we turned our back on American workers. And in so doing, we affected millions of people nationwide, because when you affect the fertile farmlands of California the way we have by diverting this water, you have indeed taken a step toward increasing the price of food. The bill that we will consider later this week is a comprehensive solution that would restore water deliveries that have been cut off due to federal regulations and environmental lawsuits and the plethora of things facing